So next up, we have Matt Rehrprogel, who is a certified SIAM professional, currently advising US state governments on managed services procurement, governance and IT operations, has an over 35-year career in IT, including operations, managed services delivery manager, consultant for private and public sector clients, and also is a lead author for the new book of knowledge, Compendium, Practical Procurement for SIAM. So Matt's talk is sharing lessons from the compendium on how service integration can be woven into the procurement process for managed services.
All right, thank you so much. Well, happy to be here. I'm excited to talk about this. This is our first time here for the conference. I've attended online in the past, but just so you know, we Integra Applied have got a new partnership with Scopism. So we're kind of the partners across the pond for SIAM. And we kind of wanted to celebrate that happening this year by coming over and meeting everyone. So we're happy to be here. The fact that we're from the US is not what's unique. I think the most unique thing is I'm the only person wearing a tie. And so I think that's, oh well, you know, better to, okay. So this is the title of the talk, Driving Integration Through Managed Service Procurement. Notice we don't use the term SIAM here, in part because, well, mainly because I don't want this to be focused on procuring integrator services. You know, this is, you can apply almost all of these concepts I'm going to talk about today to any kind of managed service procurement, especially the large complex ones that you see in government and large enterprises. So first thing, bottom line up front. I don't know if you've heard that term. That's something that I believe came out of the US military. That's where I heard it. They call it the bluff. So tell them what you're going to tell them before, you know, they have to sit through everything else. And hopefully you learn these things or you hear these things by the time I'm done. Managed service procurements are typically large, complex, they take a long time, and I know our friends over at Horizon 7, they have agile methodologies, and we were talking about that earlier. We deal with a lot of government clients, and you know, government and agile doesn't always go along. Agile might be, we got a procurement done in 9 months, you know, not, you know, instead of 18. So, yeah, they're complex and they're important because they establish critical long-term relationships. You know, these are relationships. You're getting married. You're getting married, and this procurement process is sort of dating. You know, you're dating. You're seeing, can I live with this person? Can they, you know, do we have a collaborative? Can we coexist? Second one, modular multi-party contract frameworks help to enable and sustain service integration. So it's the contract, and we've heard this, you know, I've sat in this room, listened to multiple talks, and I don't know how many times we've heard, and Richard just talked about, I don't know, is Richard here still? Yeah. Anyway, he talked about how integrating contracts, you know, so it implying that after the fact, the contracts need to be integrated so that the services work together. And we've heard people talk about how the contracts weren't aligned, or they were missing scope, or there were gaps, or there were overlaps, or whatever. In one way or another, it doesn't meet the needs. So the contract, the resulting contract is extremely important, and if you can get that right, your job of integrating services is much easier. And the integration, the third one, integration can be enabled and fostered before contract award, before start of services. You can do some of these integration methods before you even sign the contract. And as I stated before, in some of these integration approaches and methods can be and should be applied to managed service procurements in general, not just in for SIAM services, and not just in ecosystems where service integration is a thing. And we'll talk about that. So this is the agenda. I kind of hinted at it. I'm going to do some introductions. You already took care of me, so I'll probably skip that slide. But intended audience, who am I trying to message? Well, the red cards and the green cards. But I want to really talk to the green cards, not the ones that were happy with the temperature in the room, but the customers and IT managers, you know, the customer side, and particularly any procurement officials who may not be here but may hear this later. The importance of integration in the procurement process, effective contracting for integration, particularly focused on modular contract structures. How do you build that marriage? How do you build that relationship along the contracting journey or the procurement journey? And some key takeaways, and then we'll have some Q&A. So you mentioned all these things, I think. Basically, it comes down to I'm kind of a IT operations combat veteran. Okay, I started in the trenches. I was a technical professional initially. I worked 16 years in corporate, mainly in the automotive sector. Initially, I was a network guy, a DBA, then I became a group manager and hosting manager, and then I got outsourced, to HP. I became a delivery manager for 9 years for delivering infrastructure services to 4 different clients. That's when I became one of those accidental service integrators that we talked about. We had a large international customer. We had 19 different sets of services that I, as a delivery manager, had to kind of stitch together. And I was doing service integration and had never heard the term before, okay? At that point, I went to Capgemini, and I was the service integration lead for the Rolls-Royce account for North America. Is anyone from Capgemini here? Hey, so I don't know, that was, talk about combat, Anyway, so we had a service integration arrangement that was cooperative between the UK and the US, and it was very complex. And that's where I started learning about SI. We called it SI then, we didn't call it SIAM. And I learned about Capgemini's practices. So currently, for the last 2.5 years, I've been working in Integris Applied, and our bread and butter is advising state governments, federal governments on large managed services procurements, particularly ones with service integration. And I was a lead author for the practical procurement for SIAM. There's the button. Who's Integris Applied? I'll go through this real quick. We're a boutique firm in the United States focused on, like I said, our bread and butter is enabling the procurement process for complex multi-party service environments. And some of the deals that we helped build were the Texas Department of Information Resources, the Georgia Technology Authority, Virginia IT Agency, and the U.S. Defense Health Agency, which I kind of mentioned before, but that's one of the largest ecosystems I ever heard of. It's 200,000 users, 1,200 sites, something like a $2 billion run rate ecosystem. Besides those that government procurement, number one, we're Scopism's partner in the Americas to deliver the Scopism SIAM assured assessments. So we're the ones, and if people, firms, service providers headquartered in the Americas, if you want to do SSA, you can come talk to me, talk to us at Integris Applied. And we're looking, we've been doing our outreach, trying to talk to US and other providers. And if anyone wants to go down that path that HCL and Kinetic both described, come talk to us, and we'll get started on that assessment. Recently, we've also started providing or supporting service providers on proposal supports, particularly into state government. So if you're a service provider, and you're bidding into a U.S. state government RFP, we can help typically with how to navigate that process, what they're looking for, some of the pitfalls around state government. We were talking with Horizon earlier, and I was kind of trying to describe, and they were about why that's difficult. It's because every state has its own independent government, more or less. And so they set their own rules. They have their own processes and policies and so forth. There's no like umbrella that guides them on how to do procurements like the UK government has. So anyway, we do that. We do other kind of governance, SIAM-related governance and operations support as well. And if you want to hear more, see more about us, integrasapplied.com. Okay. Now, so why am I here right now? Well, partly because, we at Integris, we have a strong regard for how we do the procurements, and we think it's very beneficial. Our key is, what we like to do is foster positive relationships between customers and service providers. And we think we do a good job of it, and and especially in the SIAM realm. So we decided when the call went out for compendium for the new body of knowledge, there was one on there for sourcing and procurement. It's like, well, maybe we could do that, And so we kind of went down that path. We carved off the sourcing part because we kind of felt like that was, well, it would have made it too big. So we had a hard enough time getting the procurement side done. So we went, and maybe different from some of the others, but we really wanted that compendium to relate to and be useful, and that's why the name practical is in there. What can you do as a procurement official in a government or large enterprise to at least not get in the way of integration when it is implemented in the end? How do you maybe even improve it and implement some of the integration before you sign the contract? And that's what we're going to try to get to. So on the right side there is the table of contents for that compendium. And so I'm gonna skim over a lot of it, but there's a lot of practical information in there. I'm covering some of it, at a high level. But one of the key things that I think was, people seem to appreciate is throughout the table of contents, we have 9 subsections that we call integration opportunities. So along the way, we would call out, and we just call it integration opportunity. Here's something you can do at this stage, whether it's in the contracting or it's in evaluation or negotiation or whatever. Here's something that you can do in the procurement process to enable that outcome of service integration and better service to your customers. Okay. So, integration mandate. So this, again, I'm talking to the green card people, and a message for the procurement officials particularly. Why is it mandated? Well, and we've heard these stories, a service provider, once that ink's dry on the contract, you are pushed to provide what's in that contract to meet meet the requirements that you agreed to do in that contract, regardless, sometimes, well, by your management, you want to do that at the least price cost possible, at the highest margin, while still making those, performance targets and so forth. your customer's pushing you to do more or stop doing something that you were told to do. Either way, you are driven to meet the requirements in the contract, those obligations. You aren't necessarily motivated to integrate or to orchestrate or collaborate with those other service providers in the ecosystem. So the contracts, ideally, will include the realistic and agreed requirements that foster that kind of collaboration and orchestration, the kind of aligned delivery that you want to see. Many enterprise procurement practices are not optimized for this kind of complex multi-party service arrangement. They can buy laptops, they can buy software, they may even be able to provide or procure development services to build an application. But the complication with, first off doing the transition in of a service integrator, applying all of the changes that need to be made, the tooling, the processes, and then working to stitch all those services together is not something that procurement officials typically are accustomed to doing. And you don't do them that often. Some of these contracts might last 7-10 years. So you don't necessarily get the muscle memory to do it well. And for the procurement officials, your greatest leverage in affecting your service provider behavior and what they will agree to deliver comes near the beginning of the procurement. When they're in a competitive situation, you haven't signed anything, the requirements are more open, and they want your business. And there are other competitors out there that want the business as well. So in that procurement journey, as you down select, as you refine the requirements, as you negotiate, that leverage tends to reduce until it's at contract award, you've signed away a lot of that leverage. So as a procurement official, the more you can do to drive the integration during that procurement journey, the better off you are. And the last thing I'll say is for the green card people, if you don't drive the integration, if you aren't cognizant of it, not to use a competitor's name for anyone, but if you're not aware and you're not deliberate about trying to build integration into your agreements, then you're essentially forcing the business to do that integration for you. And just as an illustration, and this is something from Capgemini, we had a process in Indianapolis where it was a manufacturing facility and engineering, and they depended on printing a lot, for supply chains and factory operations. And we found there were complaints, and it was taking 65 days from when a printer landed on the dock until it was usable by any of the customers, the users or the factory floor or whatever. And so we did one of these continual service improvement projects, and we pulled in all the stakeholders and so forth, and fixed the tool, and we got it down to 14 days. And then we took another pass at it, and we got it down to under 5 days regularly. And it's not, it's not big deal. Okay, great. You had a continual improvement. I want to point out that reduction from 60, the difference between the 65 and 5 days is 2 months of your end users trying to get the services to work together. Essentially, they're doing the integration job because it's bouncing around and things are getting done out of order, or they're done incorrectly, or whatever. If you can do that, if you can bake that integration in as early as possible, then you're saving the business time, and there's that much value out of the contract at the end. So, modular contract structure, we're going to talk about the big RFP, because that's often what we deal with, RFPs that are, total contract value north of $100 million US. This is some of the Capgemini people might recognize this Venn diagram. I like it, it's still valid, but it shows that effective SI is made up of, you can achieve it if you have these three major dimensions to your solution. Target operating model and governance, processes, tools, and standards. And Richard talked about a lot of these things, and we've seen it from others. But one of the key things is the contractual framework. And by framework, we mean not just an individual provider, but the framework that's in agreement across the whole ecosystem. So what we're focusing on is getting to that contractual framework that enables integration. So that was kind of the why contracting is important. The what goes in a contract? Well, there's three main things: scope, price, and quality. So you have to cover those three things. The requirements are essentially the scope, and any kind of requirements, whether it's services delivered, cross-functional, any personnel type of requirements, that's the scope. Price is, what are you paying? Either is it fixed price, is it volume-based, whatever. But we like to talk about price and not cost, because the cost of a solution during this procurement process can change depending on how you balance the scope between different providers or a service provider and internal. So if you take some scope away from a provider, maybe you need to augment your own internal retained operations to make up for what you took away from the service provider's contract. So you got to look at this at a high level rather than just at the single number coming from the provider. And then quality is things like, how do you manage service levels? What about deliverables? How does reporting happen? And so forth. And so those three things set the expectations for what's going to be delivered out of that contract. So now we're getting into, this is the how. How do we structure a big RFP in order to support those the three-legged stool of the contract, and to integrate across the providers. And the blue here is, so this is, the blue is, anything in blue is part of the RFP. So that's what you're sending out to the bidders. The yellow is, or whatever color that is what gets returned as part of the solution. And all these diagrams are in the compendium, and I really encourage you to take a look at it if this is of interest. But this is how we structure a big RFP. So there's, the master contract, master service agreement, whatever you want to call it, and then a set of attachments. Attachment one in this case, the integrated program. And so it describes the ecosystem and how SIAM is built into it and what are the relationships. It provides common definition. The very first one we typically do is definitions. So we start collecting at a institutional level or enterprise level within this ecosystem, do we use the term change management? Do we say change enablement? Do we say change control? Do they mean the same thing? Or are they different? What's a major incident? Things like that. Not necessarily the targets for resolution or anything like that. That comes in the service level area. But let's get everyone on the same dictionary so that the rest of the RFP makes sense and everyone responds and proposes with the same understanding. The governance model, how are they expected to, what's the governance model for this ecosystem going to look like? How are documents changed, so forth. And I won't go through all of these. You can, like I said, you can look at them in detail in the compendium. And this is just one. It's again, this is kind of notional. You know, it's going to look something like that. And again, this is not just for integrator procurements. It's not just for service providers in an integrated ecosystem. You know, one that's already has an integrator, but this in fact, we've used this kind of structure on just a straight mainframe service provider RFP. So in here, the first, attachment 1, 2, and 4, or 1, 2, and 5 are pretty much the scope part of the stool. The attachment 4 is pricing, and attachment 3 kind of specifies the quality. Okay, so tying back to that three-legged stool. And conceptually, so this is a lot like your typical SIAM target operating model, where you have customer across the top, you have service providers and towers separated, and then you have some underlying tools and so forth, depending on, I mean, there's several ways to show it, but I wanted to show here in that the modularity of the contract framework matches the target operating model. So they fit hand in hand. You have specific, in the middle you have provider-specific contract language. So the integrator has certain requirements that the mainframe provider or the network provider doesn't, and vice versa. But they all participate in the governance, the cross-functional processes, how there's a common strategy for tooling and ticket handling and so forth. And then we have in there also agreements between providers kind of exist. They could be informal, they could be written into the contract. I think more recently they tend to be more after the fact agreements between negotiated agreements between service providers. And here, this is again another view of it that shows. And by the way, this instead of attachments, this one calls it exhibits. We get different instructions from different clients. I think if I'm not mistaken, when we looked at the UK governments, they call them schedules maybe. So it's similar in the modularity. They just give them different names. Whatever they want to call it, that's fine. But this is how we tend to structure those contract arrangements, and we bring those frameworks into one who's never had a managed service provider before. And what this does, the interesting thing here, I think, is that some of these providers don't know SIAM. They can't spell it. They have a service management tool. Maybe they have ITIL processes. Maybe they have, in one case we had a client with 5 service desks, okay? And they had no managed services happening. And this would be the first one, this mainframe. It's one state we're doing mainframe for. We still baked in all of this like cross-functional requirements, presuming that at some point they're going to bring in new providers, and they're going to have a platform. They're going to have the foundation of an integrated contract structure that works across multiple providers in the future. And we get them thinking cross-functional processes. We get them thinking, how are you going to do your tool integration? How do you do ticket exchange? Do you how? All of the people, process, and technology that put those practices in place. So we kind of sneak the SIAM is the the contract is kind of the camel's nose under the tent. For the. You had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask them. So the schedules that you would use would be the same even if you were going to have like a prime service integrator with some.
I think in this case, this would be more the prime's contract, and then the sub, would be the agreement would be between the sub and the prime. But we wouldn't necessarily, you know, maybe the client has restrictions about how much could be subcontracted, but we wouldn't tend to specify that in this procurement. You know, the mainframe provider might have, you know, they may subcontract their hardware repair. You know, we don't care as long as they meet the targets for performance. Okay. Any other questions before going on? I want to stay on schedule. Okay. Okay, so the contract, it's not the end state. That is not the ultimate. That is not the ultimate output. Even though a procurement official may, wash their hands when that's done. Okay, it's signed. Next procurement. No, the end state, the ultimate outcome of this whole process is a happy relationship, good services, and multiple parties, the multiple sources are working together along with the customer and the retained IT, all of that enabled through that process. It doesn't end at the contract. So we think of the procurement process, like I said, kind of dating, getting married, and you know, when you tie the knot, and that's not the end of the marriage, right? Or working at it. You know, you got to keep working at it, and you know, the posting up isn't going to make you happy, right? So this is a complex slide, and you know, I just tried to give an example. This is the kind of timeline we tend to lay out for a procurement, for the strategy for how you procure a given set of services, managed service provider. And we try we borrowed from the SIAM professional phases, unless you guys changed them while I wasn't looking, but the discovery and strategy at the beginning, and then, you know, plan and build. We take that concept, we use that, we take that procurement journey as a kind of a microcosm of the overall SIAM implementation, 4-phase, or however many phases, 5-phase. So we go in and we do discovery, we do data gathering, we put together a library of information about the technical environment, about the organization, about their finances, what does it cost today, all in. We call that the base case. And we, out of that comes what a documented current state. So we say, here's the current state of your services. Everybody agrees on that. We have an executive team that gets, you know, is regularly meeting through this process. And we say, okay, you agree, this is the current state of your services. This is what you're consuming right now. Maybe it's internal, maybe it's from someone else, but this is what you're doing right now. Yes, fine. Then, often in conjunction with an RFI, we go off and describe for them what could be. And the RFI is nice because it's not just part of the procurement process or helping them determine the requirements, but it's an OCM tool. It is a way of, in a way, giving the IT department to legitimize their opinion, because you not only ask the IT department, but you ask the market, what's the right way to, or what's the current state of the art in delivering mainframe services, for example. And if you have 5 vendors that come back and say, well, you know, here's how we do it, and 3 out of 5 are in rough agreement, maybe one's a little different, it legitimizes and it builds confidence in the IT team amongst the stakeholders. And we really encourage the customer stakeholder leadership to be involved in that process to understand it. And again, this is building a relationship, and the relationship's not just between, you know, procurement and the service provider. It's also between the service provider, any existing service provider, the IT department, the customer stakeholders, and the business as a whole, right? So OCM all along the way that's what building relationships about. It's enabling the organizational change along with the technical integration and the delivery of the services. So what we do is you know, we have workshops, and we read back to the customer what we heard from them. Here's what you're doing. Here's the state of the market, and we have workshops to say, how would you like this to work given your current environment? And then that becomes their target operating model, or we call it future state. So now you got the current state, the future state. The difference between the two is the requirements needed, the activities needed to get to that future state. And so you do a gap analysis. The gap analysis says, okay, we've got to get someone in here to deliver this set of services. And when you do that, you know, as strategic advisors, we also say, this not only, this has an impact on your organization. There's certain things that are required that you're not doing right now. Like maybe you're not doing vendor management. Maybe you don't have a service level management function if you want to retain that performance management and to make sure you get all the value out of that contract in the future. So we come out with a set of requirements that are going to go in the RFP. We have a set of requirements that we deliver back to the organization and say, here's what you're going to need to do to adapt to this managed service new world order, right? So we think that's a way to reduce surprises, right? Okay, and then once we have that target operating model, the requirements pop out of that, and we start building, you know, we agree, we go back and look at that contract structure, figure out what's going to work for their procurement and in this environment, and we start building the RFP. And it's an iterative process, and it takes a while, especially in big managed service procurements. Sure.
So looking at your timeline and the sequence of events, you've got the evaluation phase, and then it's followed by clarification.
Okay, let me address that. I meant to mention that, and I really thank you, because this is, again, this is notional, okay? I'm trying to include all the elements in here in some kind of order that kind of makes sense, maybe, but typically you might have one round of down select, you may have two, you may have three. You may have multiple revision sessions, okay? They may come in different orders. The reason I put evaluation first is sometimes you get in a set of 5 proposals, and you immediately do a kind of a screening score. You know, okay, these guys didn't get it. You know, we're down selecting them, you know, within 30 minutes. Okay, but then the ones that you're really interested in, you bring in and you do. You know, they're called the clarification might also be called orals, right? I don't use that term here. But oral sessions where you get face-to-face between the service provider and the customer and maybe a facilitator, and you really interrogate their solution. So both of you understand. You know, it's a two-way clarification. No, I didn't mean, you know, change management meant this. What did you mean? Who's doing that, and so forth. So there may, you know, you may have. We've facilitated service integration procurements that involve multiple service integrators and multiple service providers at the same time, okay? And these are all, you know, huge. I think this was state of Virginia that we had this. All the balls were in the air at the same time. And yeah, and you're trying to figure out, well, this integrator might work better with this set of service providers, or maybe this one can do part of it, and it becomes a very complex thing to sort through all of your options, so the many-to-many relationship. So I just wanted to show some of the typical phases or activities in a procurement journey. Due diligence is, and that's two-way. Due diligence, I know when I got outsourced, the service provider came in and said, oh, how many databases do you have? How many servers? How many websites? And so forth. And you know, there wasn't really an interrogation the other way of, can you really deliver this? You know? And so due diligence is two ways. And integration I'll get to next, but, and then negotiation tends to be near the end, you know, BAFO and so forth. Okay, 5 minutes. But really, negotiations happening all along this. You know, you're tuning the requirements, you're tuning the solution and so forth to match. And so think of this, these are all activities that where you can foster and build in the integration. So, and again, this is in the compendium if you want to drill in, but this kind of describes the various activities that were in that timeline. So I'm not going to get into this because I really wanted to get to this, the integration sessions. And this may be something, I don't know if anyone, has any service provider or green cards or red cards, anyone participated in an integration session where you have service providers talking to each other potentially prior to procurement? Okay, Cap did. I think it's kind of unique. Okay, cool. Got another green card. What this is facilitated discussions that happen before the contract's signed. The service providers can get together. Maybe it's a service integrator and a service provider. Okay, how are you going to work together on major incident management or delivering, you know, service catalog updates or whatever? How do you do that? And these are really important to be done in person because you can see the people face to face, the customers there. They have to be on their best behavior, and you can see how willing they are to integrate and work together, collaborate after the fact. So, you know, this shows, this is, you know, and we're using the old term MSI because that, you know, we're the United States. We don't, we're still learning about SIAM. But there's different kinds of integration sessions that you can do, but along the way, you're tuning the requirements, the providers, the proposers have a chance to change their solution, and it really is one of the unique tools that can be baked into that procurement journey to get as much of the integration done before the ink's wet, or ink's dry, sorry. And you can read through those requirements. So, and the other thing that's important, call out here, the integration sessions are important for all parties, not just the customer, but for the providers also. You can reduce risk because a service provider will bake in costs for risk, resources, in order to, you know, to get the deal without putting themselves at risk at price. But if you can talk through what you may need to do, may not need to do, and make the solution exactly or as close to exact as needed, then it benefits the service provider as much as the customer. Okay. All right, concluding. I'm out of time. I'm sorry, but you know, there's these methods. They benefit service providers. They benefit, you know, consultants. You have an opportunity to, if you've got a client you're advising the strategy on, you can embed that integration outcome into that procurement process, and you know, get them thinking about that early. And for the procurement officials, you know, again, it's incumbent on you to try to do as much integration as possible so you're not forcing it on your customers in the end when it's ugly and nasty and difficult and often expensive. So, all right. Additional resources, check out the compendium. Integra Supplied, come talk to me. Horizon 7 in the UK, we don't operate in Europe right now, but if any service providers are bidding into the US and you want support on proposals, particularly into government, come talk to us. Also, again, we're the SSA exclusive partner in the Americas, and if you're interested in Scopism SIAM-assured accreditation, come see us. Do I have any time for questions? I'm out. Okay, no. I'm sorry. Come talk to me. Come talk to me later. I'll be